Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Gulsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Are you going to start us off?
Yeah, I'm going to start with you laughing because I feel like lately every episode we turn on, I'm laughing. Like that's when Charlotte cuts it in.
Well, I think people appreciate that we're having fun.
We're jovial.
Jovial.
We're a couple jolly old fellers.
What is it? We're a couple rednecks trying to do science. What one of our ratings said.
I remember my advisor in grad school always called himself an overeducated redneck.
Yeah. Pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're back.
Indeed.
Had a good long weekend.
We did.
Did you happen to see that, coincidentally, I posted some stuff about coyote scat this weekend?
Oh, I didn't see it. No, I was off social all weekend.
Yeah. Well, I was out doing some food plotting, getting
Yeah.
prepped anyway.
Yeah.
And I found a coyote scat, and I immediately could see that it was a ball of hair and bones and stuff, and it had a bunch of little hooves in it. Fawn hooves. So I did a post about the fawn hooves.
Yeah. How many did it have in it?
How many hooves?
Yeah.
3.
Okay. So it wasn't more than one fawn.
No, as far as I could tell.
I guess we can't rule that out.
Yeah, it looked like it was just one fawn.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that that it threw up. I don't I don't think it got it all down.
The way you phrased that.
Well, I was trying to think of what's the best way to say this publicly on the air. Yeah.
You can tell we have young kids by the way it's calling it throw it up.
Well, I showed my kids the hooves. They were fascinated. My brother's kids as well.
How did they react to it?
They thought it was awesome.
Did they think it was sad at all?
No, my mother and
I feel like that's how my
Stasia.
daughter immediately, she has that strong sense of justice. And I've shown her things like that before, and she's like, "Dad, we need to get out the traps."
Well,
it's not fair that these predators are eating these babies.
I guess I've had a different kind of influence on mine because, like, I don't know if you've ever read the book. It's like The Hen and the Fox or something like that. But the fox raids the hen house and eats one of the hens, and I can remember her saying it now. My oldest, she said something. Well, the fox has got to eat too.
Yeah,
it's like
I
right,
teach mine the same thing.
They have to eat too, and I even wrote that on the post that I did.
Yeah,
the coyotes got to eat too.
I've walked my daughter through that process as well, and told her, I was like, yeah, it's sad that the fawn got eaten, but think about the coyote pups back at the den.
Yeah.
How many people do you think just turned this off after we said that?
Well, they may be wondering, where are we going with this?
Yeah. Well, how did it make you feel when you saw those hooves in there?
I thought it was really cool.
Just fascinated.
Yeah.
I think I would. I'm more fascinated by that stuff than anything.
Yeah, I was immediately wanting to dig around and see what what everything looked like.
Yeah.
And I thought it was remarkable. One of the hooves was almost completely intact.
Yeah. I'll be honest too, I have a very different reaction when I see deer remains in a coyote scat compared to turkey remains in a coyote scat.
Yeah, when I found that's not true. I found a turkey toe pad in it, and actually it was the first reason I did a deep dive on coyote stuff.
Yeah, I remember that
post years ago.
Yeah.
Because I was turkey hunting and I found a turkey toenail sticking up and ended up finding, and did not feel bad about that either. It was more like, I cannot believe I've just found this.
Yeah. It doesn't make me feel bad in the sense that I immediately feel the need to go out and do something about it, like I was alluding to earlier, but it it concerns me more so from the perspective of, we probably have more deer than we really need in most places, but that's not the case with turkeys.
Yeah, no one says they have too many turkeys
Right.
unless they are trying to grow some
Right.
crops or something,
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's not, I mean, a lot of people, that's how they feel though. When they see that, they're like, I have to do something about this.
yeah, like that just can't happen.
Right.
Well, I got really intrigued about that, and I've gotten a number of questions over the years, and we still get a few uh, people asking us, for example, which part of the predator community should we be targeting if we're going to, initiate trapping, those kinds of
Hmm.
questions. So I thought it would be fun for us to go back to coyotes and do a deep dive specifically on them because, you know, I would say early as a biologist, I kind of had this perception that coyotes weren't eating that many turkeys.
Right. Same.
Like, they can fly away. Their vision is so good. Maybe a hen on the nest through the night occasionally, but they're in places where coyotes don't hunt well. I kind of had that vision of it, and that has my position, I guess, has changed somewhat over time.
Yeah.
Like, I think the coyotes are probably eating more turkeys than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
So, how do you want to start this thing?
Well, what did you come up with?
Well, I guess that everybody out there, you probably have already put it together. I did the deep dive on this one. Dr. Gulsby did the deep dive last, a couple weeks ago, whenever the
Yeah.
episode on food plots was.
Y'all should be proud of us. We actually have set aside some days to record multiple episodes, so we're getting ahead of
Yeah.
this thing now.
Yeah. And we're also in doing that trying to not just have some episodes where we talk about things, but have some deep dive episodes, which I think has been one of the really unique things about the podcast,
Yeah.
because that's pretty rare. That
That's kind of our niche.
Yeah, we want to keep that rolled in, and I think the audience is enjoying it based on the feedback we get about it. And but we also have lined up some people
Hmm.
to talk about some really interesting topics. And I think we're probably going to try to get a few updates here soon. So keeping the gamut of content coming.
Hmm. Diversified.
This time I went through the literature, and I did that in several ways, but I was trying to look for things related to coyotes and turkeys.
So, I would guess that the literature on this topic is increasing over the past 5 years compared to prior to that.
I would say that's probably accurate.
Okay.
There has been a strong interest in coyotes, however, for a while.
Right.
Not as much focused on turkeys, but
Yeah.
I think the things relevant to turkeys is changing more recently, and some of that is coming with advancements in techniques.
Hmm. Yeah, I know there's some old data from Texas, for example, on coyotes and turkeys.
Yeah, and I've dug up some of that.
Yeah. And part of it too is the literature from east of the Mississippi is kind of sparse because we haven't had them here that long.
Yeah,
So we haven't had long to study them.
and some place in North Carolina, out in the east part of North Carolina, it was in the 90s, I think, when they started showing up.
Yeah.
This is really recent there.
And I've been out of the coyote literature for a while, but when I was in it, I do remember there was still some talk that was floating around about like even up in like North Carolina and Virginia that landscape still was not saturated with
Mhm.
coyotes, 15, 20 years ago. I don't know if it's become so since. I definitely get the sense that we're saturated now in like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia,
I
Florida for sure.
I don't know saturated is the right word, but they're definitely ubiquitous.
Well, I feel like the land, I guess what I mean by that, to be a little bit more explicit, is I feel like in most parts of Alabama, coyotes are probably already around carrying capacity.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, maybe the landscape could support more, a few more here and there, but I think that they're more naturalized here,
yeah,
as opposed to being in a like a early invasion phase.
yeah. Well, I actually have uh, the best resource available uh, on this specific thing. Like, when did coyotes show up and where?
Mm-hmm.
I have a range map that was
Perfect.
put together. It's covering from 1900 all the way to 2016, right before it was published. This was
Yeah.
led by Roland Case, who was
Right.
he is a professor at NC State and also dual position with the North Carolina Museum there.
North Carolina Museum of, is it Natural History or
I don't know the full name of it. I'd have to go
anyway?
look it up. But uh, yeah, he was also on my PhD committee.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of work with coyotes, deer, and turkeys at the same
Right.
time, and he was involved in that. But they basically reconstructed the range expansion based on a whole bunch of data sets, and they were like specimens and photographs and reports from state agencies and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah.
It's
I
pretty
know,
cool.
to give the listeners context, I do know, from the time that I spent working intensively on coyote science as opposed to turkey science. Um, and I was mostly researching coyotes from their interaction with deer perspective, but I remember back then at the time, this is a very needed paper is the point that I'm trying to make,
Yeah,
because
you could have
we
just said
had
that.
we had very coarse timelines. It was like, oh well, they kind of split and they expanded on these
Yeah,
two fronts, one to the north and one to the south, and they started showing up in this state around this decade. It was very coarse.
yeah. Well, we had, you know, at, was running into the same problem,
Mm-hmm.
but we had a unique situation where we knew the first coyote that was detected, when that was on Fort
Yeah,
Bragg, where my PhD research was. It was in 1989, I believe.
yeah,
Like, they had the observation that confirmed
right.
first coyote on the base, which was right around 1990.
But my guess would be that population expanded quite a bit from then to now.
Yeah,
And so like
absolutely.
when that first sighting occurred, that was extremely rare, and there was probably not another sighting for quite a while.
Yeah, they have pretty good information on it there actually, and it was kind of an exponential growth curve. Took 2 or 3 years to really get going,
Mm-hmm.
and then by 10 to 12 years later, right there in the early 2000s, there were a lot of them then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's
So
how it was. I mean, that timeline I think is pretty applicable for most states along the Atlantic, right?
yeah, that was probably the latest timeline,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but it's kind of weird. So I can just describe this map, and if you're watching on YouTube, we'll cut it in as Figure 3 from this KZ et al. Paper, and it's color coded based on the range expansion. But if you look at the red color, that's as of 1900, and the range was really constricted compared to now. In fact, they were basically going into East Texas, and they were not yet in Louisiana. They were over most of Oklahoma and Missouri, all the way up to southern Wisconsin, it looks like. And they extended into Canada, especially in western Canada, up all the way almost to Alaska in
Mm-hmm.
1900. Of course, they extended down through Mexico all the way down to like the Yucatan
Yeah, that's what I
Peninsula.
was gonna say. Is I'm looking at that figure now, and it's really wild how much ground they cover. And
Yeah, so that
you
was
think
as of
about the climate.
1900.
Yeah, you think about the climate and the ecosystem and
Yeah,
how much variability there is from the Yucatan Peninsula all the way up to,
Yeah,
almost into Alaska.
we're talking about almost to the equator, from the equator to the Arctic Circle. Pretty
That's insane.
incredible.
Yeah.
So, that range started expanding pretty quickly. By the 60s, they were, into Alabama and southern Georgia, and looks like even into, the panhandle of Florida down into maybe central Florida.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see most of the eastern seaboard, it's still, they're not present. And one of the things I found really interesting, and I think there is a follow-up paper, although I didn't go dig it up, from Kay's lab
Mm-hmm.
that looked at genetics. And you can kind of see going north of the Great Lakes, they come around down into the eastern seaboard and sort of start coming south.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of see it in the timeline. So they were basically diverging around the Great Lakes and then coming back together. And that, I think, based on the genetics work, is why the Carolinas were, or especially North Carolina, was the last, because it was like the northern and southern ranges converging.
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. The
So-
latest area to be colonized, for those of you that aren't looking at the figure, was, it's like a oval that, is 50-50 split between Virginia and North Carolina.
Yeah. And that was in 2000, the late 2000s, up into the blue color. Yeah, that's up in the extreme northeast part of the range. So that was in the 2000s
Yeah.
when they colonized right there in the Piedmont of
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina. So really interesting, just kind of looking at that timeline. But in, pretty much east of the Mississippi,
Yeah.
we're talking about 60s, 70s before they were colonizing most areas.
Yeah, and on an ecological time scale, that's like last week.
Yeah, like it basically just happened.
Yeah. So what is the potential unique challenge posed by having a large predator arrive somewhere where there's prey species that are completely naive to it?
What do you mean?
Do we have, or is there any other examples of how that's played out, and is it different than a typical predator-prey dynamic? Do we know anything about that?
Yeah.
I think it stands to reason that, if you've got a turkey population in, let's just use North Carolina as an example, because we've been talking about North Carolina and Virginia for a while, and you've got turkey populations there, and then they've never been exposed to coyotes, and now all of a sudden there's this predator taking large numbers of individuals from that population, and I have no experience watching out for that predator. So you would think they would be more effective when they first arrive somewhere.
Typically, that's the pattern that you see across most novel species interactions like that.
Is that
front, basically you kind of have this, once the predator colonizes, you go through this period of time where essentially the population is growing to a level that could be problematic, I guess, for the prey species. And then you kind of, once you get to some critical mass of predators, then you would typically go through this period of time where their impact on prey is heightened because they're naive to it. And we see
so that is
populations essentially adapt. Yeah, no, there are a lot of good studies on this with smaller species on islands in particular.
Yeah.
And in island situations, in some cases it could cause extinction, but that's pretty rare in continental scale things like this. Like they're not going to cause turkeys to go extinct. In other words, like that would be exceptionally rare for that kind of stuff to happen with a predator expansion.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about in this particular scenario too is it's not like there's a learning. I guess there wouldn't be a learning phase for the coyote because obviously they've been in Texas forever. There's turkeys in Texas. Now the environments that they're pursuing turkeys in are going to be different, in South Texas compared to Virginia. But they're not completely naive to the prey base,
That's right.
whereas the turkey is completely naive to the predator, right?
Yes. Well, sort of. They're completely naive to this predator.
To that predator.
That's one thing I think, you know, we probably would not see that pattern that I just described here because when we're talking about like a feral cats getting released on an island, the
Hmm.
prey on that island are naive to any kind of predator like that. Like, New
Yeah.
Zealand, there aren't
Yeah.
even mammal predators.
Yeah, so they're not even being vigilant whatsoever.
Right. That's a completely different situation, whereas coyotes are very similar to some of the historical predators,
Yeah.
particularly red wolves,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the turkeys are not completely naive to predation. I mean, everything wants to eat a turkey, right? They're not
Right.
just that's very different than being on an island that never had any predators.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to think through right now, like all the major predators, especially of adult turkeys right now is what I'm thinking about,
Mhm.
and how they like how their hunting strategy might differ from those of coyotes and how that might, you know, put in this dynamic one or the other species involved in it at a disadvantage or an advantage. Like
Mhm.
how different, for instance, is the way a coyote hunts compared to the way that a gray fox hunts? Or how different is a coyote from a bobcat that's more of an ambush predator? I don't know.
Mhm.
I mean, so turkeys have been exposed to certain aspects of coyote hunting behavior, but not all of them.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what happens here. It's not you basically the predator prey population, then that dynamic reaches a different equilibrium, right? Like, and there's lots of factors that could play into that, like the relative abundance of the predator and the prey, the how plastic is the diet of the
Hmm.
predator, novel behaviors that might be associated with their interactions.
Right.
But basically that's what you would expect is you would reach some equilibrium at some point
Yeah.
in their populations. Not
The
that it's
one,
completely stable, it would fluctuate, but you'd have some sort of equilibrium where you'd eventually stabilize.
yeah. Tell me if you can think of a relevant counterexample, but I cannot think of another turkey predator that hunts cooperatively like coyotes would. Because, I think about, some of these photos that people send us of um, turkeys, catching and killing a turkey, or coyotes catching and killing a turkey in a food plot, right? And a lot of times there's more than one coyote there in those images. Like they're hunting as a,
Mhm.
a pair or maybe even a group of three. That would be unique for sure.
Yeah, it certainly could be. One thing I found interesting, you always hear about the pack of coyotes that killed the deer or whatever.
Right.
In our work on Fort Bragg, we were genotyping turkeys and deer and anything basically that got eaten. We had fox squirrels. I don't remember if we genotyped any of their mortalities, but
Mm-hmm.
we never detected more than one coyote at a kill site.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
That doesn't mean it never happened,
Yeah.
but uh, we yeah we only detected one in every case that we were able to detect coyote at the kill.
That's really interesting.
So that kind of made us wonder how much are they actually cooperating. Now, with those same data, we had many, or shouldn't say many. We had some pairs where there were clearly a male and female that were paired,
Mm-hmm.
and they were moving around, in synchrony, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't stay together all the time,
Right. Yeah.
but they were together a lot.
Yeah. That's my experience with mated pairs too. I've caught a few mated pairs
Hmm.
and seen that same trend.
So I could see it, when they had pups that are getting a little older and start running well around with them, you
Yeah.
might have a slightly larger group size, but I suspect most of the time it's a pair if
Well,
it's
one of
not
the things that
more.
I was curious about, and y'all probably address this, but I wonder, if coyotes share a prey item more often with other individuals or more closely related to. Like, did y'all have the genetic resolution to differentiate like siblings and parents from offspring and things like that?
Um, I think we did.
I'm asking you to recall some really specific details from a study that was 15 years ago.
Yeah, 15 years ago, and Chitwood was the one leading all the genetics work. So
I bet
wasn't even-
Chitwood knows the answer to this.
Oh, he would know. He remembers exactly how many samples.
Yeah.
Chitwood, if you're washing dishes right now, let us know how many individuals it was, and I'll put it back on there.
Yeah, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, there was this mated pair, and I remember it was a Tuesday." And
Yeah. Well, he tells me relatively often that he listens to the show often while he's washing dishes. With so that's why I gave that reference.
There's nothing else to do. Might as well listen to Will and Marcus.
Well, I'm suffering already, so we may as well just continue. Like this one, he just
Coulter,
puts all the suffering in one place.
Coulter, if you're listening, go leave us a review right now and say this is at least better than washing dishes. Or more entertaining than washing dishes. That's all you have to say.
Yeah. So, you want to continue on with this?
Yes.
Okay, well, we've established, I think, the timeline for coyotes, and a lot of people might just find that itself interesting, but I got really curious when I found that toe pad in toenail, in that scat a couple of years ago. So I started looking through the literature, really curious about it, just trying to gather information because when I saw it, like I said, it was sort of striking to me. I was like, man, how many turkeys are coyotes eating?
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking in the literature to see what I could find. The majority of studies are diet related. And this is actually relevant to something I said earlier, where there are some more specific studies here recently that look in the diet of coyotes and what percentage or what frequency a turkey shows up in it. Mm-hmm. But historically, we didn't have the same technology, and they usually would lump them with other birds.
Yeah, you would just see like avian in a percentage.
Yeah. So I have dug up quite a few studies, just looking at diet in general.
Mm-hmm.
There was one, it's a thesis, which we'll put all these in the show notes. I also have a post on Facebook that has them all linked in it. Maybe we'll reshare that through our Dear Lad page. So Melville 2012 is a pretty small sample size, but that was in Texas. They did not find any evidence of turkeys in 16 samples that they processed, so small sample size. There was a study in South Carolina that was larger, that was in the early 2000s. They looked at over 400 samples, and they found the most common thing in the diet was soft mast, which I can relate to. In fact, that's an interesting sidebar just itself.
Yeah.
Like every coyote scat has persimmons in it.
Yeah.
I don't understand, even if it's May.
Persimmons, muscadines, blackberries, and pears are what I've seen coyotes eat more than anything. I mean, I've had scats that are entirely comprised of the seeds of all four of those species.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing else in it. They're just eating fruit.
Yep.
But I agree with you. You see it during times of the year where you wouldn't expect to.
Yeah, like why is there persimmons in there in May?
I don't know.
Like as far away from the persimmon masting season as you could get.
I don't know. Those bastards are damn good at finding.
I think we had this discussion when you were talking
persimmons. I wish I was as good at it.
In that episode where you told everybody that you genotyped a human.
Yeah.
Scat.
Yeah.
Oh man. One of those episodes, I think we.
The show has just gone downhill from there, right? It peaked that day.
Yeah, that's the most memorable moment. Like when you found the glove, the purple glove in the scat.
Apparently that, and when I translated things into how they compared to the state of Alabama.
Yeah.
And then the show's gone downhill.
Yeah. those were the two key moments. So in that Schreckengoss paper, they were one of them that did what I was just saying. They did not distinguish between turkeys and other birds, but depending on the month they were looking in, the birds comprise somewhere between 0 and 18% of the diet, based on how they calculated it. I did not make notes on whether it was frequency or proportion, but usually I did write the word proportion, so I'm assuming they did proportion in this one. But usually they give pretty similar results, and they usually put both in the paper. So we know it's not more than 18% in any given month, but it was curious that spring was the highest proportion. So that's when they were up on the upper end of that. Paper from South Dakota. So I'm trying to give you kind of a smattering across the range. McCracken and Urish in the early 1980s in South Dakota estimated that 2% of the coyote diet was turkey.
Okay.
So one of our friends and one of your lab mates, Mike Cherry, did a study. There was over 673 samples in Georgia. And they also did not distinguish turkey from other birds, but it ranged between 9 and 16% of the diet was bird. So we at least know it wasn't more of the diet than that, right?
Yeah.
There was one from Florida, which I was somewhat surprised. I wasn't expecting to find a Florida one, but Grigione, 2011. Grigione. I don't know.
Work through it. Don't get hurt, though.
So they had 120. Again, did not distinguish turkeys, but 11% of the diet was bird.
Did you find Kelly at all?
Oh.
As you were going through those, it just made me think of that. James Kelly did his food habit study in Georgia. That would have been back in the mid 2000s. That was published around 08, 10, somewhere at 10 or 10 or 11.
You know what would be phenomenal? There's so many studies like this over the years. It'd be awesome to go back and look at over a timeline how this coyote diet changed.
Yes.
Because there are several studies from some states.
Yeah, right.
And you can just see how has that changed over time.
So we didn't, in that study, we didn't distinguish turkeys from other birds either.
Which study?
In the Kelly et al. That was James Kelly's master's research. But we had one site that we found up to 20% of scats contained bird remains. And that was particularly...
That was in your work?
Yeah, that was in central Georgia. And that happened to be during March and April too.
Yeah.
And what was really...
Which is coincidental, you know.
Yeah.
First of all, there should be lots of carcasses from hunters.
Yes, so there should be some scavenging occurring.
Yeah, there could be. There also, during breeding, and we would expect the male to be most vulnerable during that time, and the female, absolutely, while she's sitting on the nest.
Yeah.
So, and brooding, I guess. They're also commonly lost then as well.
Yeah, because they won't flush. They'll try to stay around their poults. But what was really interesting about that is during March and April, we had one site where birds were found in 20% of scats. But on the other site that was just a few miles down the road, they were only found in about 4% of scats. And I don't have data on this, but anecdotally, every time that I turkey hunted when I was working on those sites, I would hunt on the site where they were found in 20% of scats. So to me, that percentage may be indicative of the difference in turkey abundance between the two sites.
So they're showing up in the scat when they're more available to show up in the scat.
Yeah, they're showing up in the scat at five times the rate on the site that had a better huntable population, at least from a hunter's perspective.
That's another important point. You know, instinctually, I think most people would be would think of that a very different way. They would think,
Right.
oh, wow, when 20% of the scats have it, that means they're really crushing the turkey
Yeah.
population. But it's more worth it for coyotes to eat turkeys when there's a lot of them.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is interesting too, that may be worth talking about for a minute if you want to. But coyotes are such a generalist predator that they can divert, their diet is very diverse. And
Yeah.
so they don't become too dependent on any particular food item, which is a good thing in the sense that if you're a turkey manager, they're not a turkey specialist predator. And
Yeah.
we can talk more about that in just a
Right.
second. But on the flip side, the downside of it is that if your turkey population goes down, your predator population, or at least in terms of coyotes, doesn't necessarily track that because they just switch to eating other prey.
Yeah. That's one way to look at it. Another thing that I was going to say, some of the alternative foods are also associated with higher quality turkey habitat.
That's a good point too.
So, for example, we were talking about earlier, you know what? Even in my current stature, I'm not a very fast person. I might be, faster than you think. So don't grin and snicker. But I can still catch berries.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fast enough to catch berries. Like they're really easy to catch. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if you're managing your property such that there's fruit everywhere,
Yeah.
there are literally dozens of studies, and all of them find fruit as one of the major components.
Yeah. Right.
And you know what another one is that I would not have thought? What's another major food item that's usually in the top, especially during the summer?
Insects.
Insects.
They eat the heck out of them.
Now, I can't catch a grasshopper as well as I used to.
Yeah.
Uh,
But it's a lot easier than a rabbit.
yeah, I can catch it before I can catch a rabbit. You're right. But my point is, if you're managing the landscape such that those things are really abundant, it's sort of like the example you just gave. When turkeys are really abundant, it's more worth it for them to eat more of that. Well,
Yeah.
when you got fruit everywhere and, insects everywhere, which are both important for turkeys, you're providing an alternative that's much easier to catch.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good little sidebar for us. I didn't think we'd get there yet, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess taking that a step further, if you want to keep talking about it, I mean, coyotes are typically drawn to early succession.
Yeah.
A lot of their food items occur there. So some people might think, well, I mean, obviously we always promote managing for early succession for turkey's benefit on this podcast, but just with that one piece of information, some people might conclude that, well, I don't want early succession on my property because I'm drawing in coyotes. But remember, in ecology, things are never that simple. So yeah, sure, you may be drawing in more coyotes, but you're drawing them in because they have a greater prey base. You've expanded their prey base out.
With your work on coyotes, you just gave me a really interesting idea, and I wanted to ask you a question about it because you
Mhm.
may be familiar with it. With the work that's been done on coyote movement,
Mhm.
has anyone looked at the landscape composition
Mhm.
and whether or not that's influencing the establishment of a home range?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, if
Yeah.
you have more early succession, does that make it more likely that a coyote will establish a home range there? Because my instinct is no.
I don't know that it makes it more likely that they'll establish a home range there, but we definitely have used resource selection function data to show that that is a preferred and selected for
Yeah.
cover type.
So you'd see within their home range, they use that space more
Yeah.
selectively.
Yeah.
But I don't know that if you take a step up in, the selection
Right.
in terms of scale, I'm guessing they probably are filling in most of the space. Like,
That's got to be out there.
there's not gaps in the landscape where there's no coyote, like the coyotes aren't using that space, right? I mean, unless it's water or
No, I think
something.
I mean, the intensity, there's definitely variation in the intensity of use across the landscape,
Yeah.
but I think if what you're saying, I think you're right in the sense that almost 100% of the landscape now has a coyote pass through it, at least on some relatively
Yeah, it's like
regular
within their
basis.
home range.
Yeah, yeah, but um, I mean, I do see trends in properties just from trapping, just using catch per unit effort as like an index of abundance. I do tend to see that properties that have major travel corridors on them oftentimes are more fertile trapping grounds. And so, like, those like trans power line right of ways, major river corridors, sometimes
Mhm.
places like that are generally where I see, generally when I see properties having extreme densities compared to other places that I've seen, they meet that criteria. But that's an interesting dynamic. I don't think this is something that we want to get into today, but I think a lot of times on those properties, the functional density of coyotes probably isn't that much different than elsewhere because a lot of those individuals are transient. They're just moving
Mhm.
through because of the connectivity that it provides rather than setting up shop there and making their living there,
Right.
if that makes
So
sense.
you may have the same number of resident ones that
Yeah.
establish a home range and defend that territory from others, but some locations on the landscape have a higher effective density because the transients use it to move across the landscape.
Yeah, I think so.
That's interesting.
And these are all, we should be very clear, these are all just hypotheses right now. I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't tested any of this stuff. We're just kind of
Yeah.
working through our thoughts with y'all.
Yeah, so let's see. I skipped I'm trying to bounce around and give you a smattering. Also, we'll link this post. There are that I'm going through. I made notes on all of these publications, and there's probably seriously over 20 linked. So if you're interested in a particular part of the world that I didn't talk about, it's a
Hmm.
good chance I have a paper linked to it where you're at.
Yeah. And to speak to what you talked about earlier too, I think this is something that just popped into my mind that I think you'll be really interested in. But we John Hickman, for his master's research, he was specifically looking at movements of female coyotes during the breeding season. So it would have been like late winter into early spring, obviously a period of interest to turkey hunters and managers too. And when we were going through that data, I'm trying to think about. Yeah, I think there were like 30% of the individuals that we tagged didn't have home ranges. About 70% of them did.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one other metric I was gonna bring up, and now, oh yeah, I remember what it was. So we had like, I don't remember. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of the low teens, I think, in numbers of females tagged on this property. And after the fact, um, we were particularly interested in the areas that they used and how intensively they used them during the fawning season because of the implications for that intensity of use might have for the probability of coyotes encountering a fawn in that
Mm-hmm.
area, right? And so we built these really cool 3D maps in ArcMap, and basically what it would do is it went around, it segmented the landscape out into these relatively small grid cells. I don't know how big we made them. I mean, they may have been like 100 yards by 100 yards or something like that. And then we just counted all the GPS locations that occurred in those grid cells across the landscape. And then ArcMap allowed us to make like little like 3D mountain peaks that
Mm-hmm.
represented the intensity of use of each of those grid cells. And it was really cool because once you pieced it all together from, I think it was like 13 or 14 females that we had tagged on this one property, and you see that it looks like mountains, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they all kind of fit together. If you color code them, you've got, mountain A, B, C, D, and they're they're not a Venn diagram. They don't overlap. So you have
Yeah.
these different females and they're occupying the landscape, and then all of a sudden you'll see that there's this gap between these two, right?
Yeah. You
And
could predict that that's
all the
somebody
others
you
are
didn't tag.
exactly, all the others are butted up against each
Yeah.
other, and we never did this because we ran out of time in the study, but it would have been so cool in hindsight to go out and try to intensively trap those those holes, so
Yeah.
to speak, in the landscape and see, like, was there a female occupying that space? And I think that speaks to what you were bringing up earlier. There was likely a female using that area. It was just that we didn't catch her.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So I think there's pretty good evidence that they're establishing a territory and defending it. And I
Yeah.
remember Dana Morin, I think it was who was telling me about it, how her work in Virginia, the home ranges looked like donuts, where, they weren't using it very intensively in the middle because they were at the boundaries defending it all the time.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's relevant. I hear people talk about this all the time. Like if you remove coyotes, if you remove one of those females that's defending her territory, that opens the door for others potentially to move in.
So from a deer perspective, we have no evidence that occurs.
From what?
From a deer perspective, of the coyote removal studies that have been done for fawns, right?
Yeah.
I have never seen one where they trapped coyotes and then they were able to show a decrease in survival or a decrease in recruitment after trapping. Okay? Like to where it's worse than it was before they did anything. I should make that clear. I've never seen where trapping made the situation worse.
Yeah. There's only 1 year in the South Carolina study that it was lower overall.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then we found the same thing in Georgia too. Like if you want to get into that right now and the effects of removal.
Yeah, I had a couple more studies I was going to.
Yeah, let's go into that. Sorry, I've been sidetracking.
Well, no, it's fine. I think it's good conversation. So, let me just glance down through here. I don't think there was a single study that would have been where turkeys could have been more than about 15% or 18%, maybe even been the highest for that part of that study.
Yeah.
Where turkeys could have been more of the diet than that. So it's relatively low. Again, we'll link this so you can look at all these other studies. I'm not going to go through every single one. There was a more recent study that used more advanced techniques. They were using, I guess, metabarcoding, genetic stuff to identify things in coyote scat.
Oh, is that Youngman?
Yeah, Jordan Youngman et al. And this was in South Carolina, and they had 3 sites. And if you look at Figure 3 from that study, they show you the items that they found in that paper. And they, across the 3 sites, they looked at the coyote diet, and I found it pretty remarkable how similar they are. Like deer is 70, the frequency, this doesn't mean 70% of their diet, but in 70% of the scats, roughly, across all 3 sites, deer were in the scat.
Yeah.
Were detected. Turkey was also remarkably similar across them, and it was about 10%. 10% frequency.
And they specifically took it to turkey. It wasn't just bird.
It's wild turkey. Yep.
Yeah.
And they lumped other avian, and the other avian looks like is somewhere around 5%.
Where are you looking at that? Because I'm on Scholar right now, and I typed in Youngman coyote food habit and can't find it.
It's actually sympatric mesopredators, because he did coyote, bobcat, and fox.
Got it. There it is.
But he did not have the study was focused on coyotes, so there wasn't a very big sample size on the other ones. I think those were misidentified scats that they did on accident.
Okay.
And then it came back, for a different predator.
Yeah, that was a big thing that I realized during some of my dissertation work as well, is that it's really, really difficult to differentiate bobcat,
I think we already got it.
Bobcat, coyote, and fox scats from each other.
And human occasionally.
And human apparently occasionally anyway, even though that was cross-contamination. Marcus is never going to quit laughing about it. But
man.
But yeah, like even if you use like I mean, you guys think that the research that I was involved in was bad? We literally, as wildlife biologists, there are publications out there that you can buy that will tell you the average length, diameter, and shape of every mammal's poop in North America and beyond. So to say that I was a part of the shittiest work that has ever been done on scat would not be true.
Wow. So who had to measure all of them?
Can you imagine just sitting there with it? You're trying to
Man, this one's a giant turd.
it's a curved scat, so you're out there with a string trying to make sure that you follow the contour.
Oh
So
man.
there are far worse things that you can have to do with scat than what I did. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, back to this. This was a really cool study from Youngman and kind of, confirms that, well, I guess we could probably try to apply it to some of these other studies. A lot of the studies have about 10 or 15% bird,
Yeah.
when they lumped them.
Yeah.
And based on this, probably somewhere between half and 2/3 of that could be turkey, especially if it's concentrated in the spring.
Yeah. What's interesting? So, what figure have you looked at figure 2? Are you looking at
Yes,
figure
I
2 right
have.
now?
No, I'm looking at figure 3.
So figure 2 is interesting because it shows the frequency of occurrence of different food items in bobcat, coyote, and gray fox scats.
Yeah.
And so the frequency of occurrence means, oh gosh, I always get mixed up on this.
If you had 10 scats, the
Yeah,
number
yeah,
of them that had the item detected.
that's right. That's right. It's actually higher for gray fox than
Yeah, the
coyotes.
one thing I would
The wild turkey portion of the diet, anyway.
yeah, I think it's important to point out the sample size of gray foxes is much smaller.
Okay.
But I did note that almost 20% of the scats they tested had turkey in them.
Yeah, the gray fox
Yeah.
scats, and then it was
It was lower for
closer.
bobcat.
Yeah, it was the lowest for bobcat,
Yeah, only about 5%.
and kind of between the two for coyote. That's interesting.
Yeah, I found that interesting as well. But I was trying to keep it focused on coyotes here.
My bad.
It's all good. So, we've been talking about what coyotes eat. What about from the turkey's perspective? I thought that might be interesting to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
There are some studies where coyotes are eating a fair amount of the turkeys. It's usually only a few percent, especially of adult males. But there was one Hoochin 2005. This is from Texas and Kansas, Rio Grande, 313 sample size of turkeys. 47% of their mortalities, so not 47% of the turkeys they tagged, 47% of the ones that died, they associated with coyote.
So they had 300 something turkeys.
Yeah, I don't know I didn't write down what the mortality rate was, so
Yeah.
we could work out what number of the 313
Yeah.
was it. Usually, we're in this, let's say 60% on average, 60-something percent survival rate, so maybe half of the 40%. So I'm trying to do math right here, folks. You know how that goes. It's not very good. What's 10?
Oh boy. Please don't cut this, Charlotte. Let him work through. You carry the one.
So what? That's about 100 mortalities. Yeah, almost 100 mortalities. So maybe 40 to 50 for a coyote out of the 313.
That's a lot.
So that's my guessing. I don't know what their mortality rate was in that study. It could have been,
Okay.
they could have had a 70-something% annual survival or a 40-something%.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it is.
Yeah.
But, that was more than I suspected. I think that was hens. There was a Mississippi study. This was one of our colleagues, Miller et al., 1999. It's a really cool study from Tallahassee. And predation was the leading cause of mortality. 46% of their mortalities were predation.
Mm-hmm.
And I did write it down on this one. They confirmed that coyotes were 5 of the 51 hens that got eaten. So about
5 of 51 that got eaten?
Yeah,
So less than 10% cause-specific mortality.
that's right.
So
And of course,
overall, the
five
overall
out of
number,
294.
5 out of 300 turkeys basically
Yeah.
got eaten by coyotes.
So none of those were males. Those were all hens, and they were. I wrote that nesting hens had higher risk. So it sounds like not all of them were on nest, but some, more than not. Let's see. Well, there's another one from Ontario. Nadzilski. That's what
Close
I'm going to go
enough.
with. And Bowman, 2015. And they had 53 turkeys tagged. Predation by coyotes were the leading cause of mortality for hens. 16 of 18 hens that were killed by a mammalian predator were coyote. So 16 out of 53.
Okay.
So that's more substantial.
Yeah, for sure. That's worrisome.
Yeah. Most of these studies, by the way, the predation risk and the survival rate generally is lower during the reproductive season, which I think we've said sometime, but this is going through quite a few studies. That's very consistent.
So I just came across Table 3 in Youngman. Did you look at that?
I have, but I do not remember what's in it.
Oh, well, what's interesting is they have, so these are parameter estimates for the top models for turkey and deer consumption by coyotes in that study. Remember, this is the one from South Carolina. And it was really interesting. So there was nothing that was a significant predictor of turkey consumption, but for deer, the frequency of occurrence of turkey remains in scats had a negative effect on the amount of deer in scats, if I'm interpreting this correctly. And I just pulled this.
They're negatively correlated?
Yeah. It looks like basically as turkeys eat more deer, or as turkeys eat more deer.
Where are you going with this?
Wow.
You need some more of that Kool-Aid coffee you made earlier.
I think I may have just stumbled on an idea. Let's just have the turkeys eat the coyotes. Problem solved.
That reference that I just made is because Will made his coffee with Gatorade this morning. It was not in reference to some sort of illegal activity.
Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that. Although it probably should be illegal to make coffee with Gatorade.
Yeah, I can't think of a reason why it should be illegal, because I don't think that's something that people want to do.
So if you ever question whether or not you should listen to me for advice, now everyone has the answer. But yeah, so I normally mix up a tumbler of ice water every morning. And this morning I felt like I needed some more electrolytes, so I put a little bit of that powder in there, and then I got to the office and poured some what I thought was water from my tumbler into my coffee maker, and it was Gatorade. So
Rookie mistake.
So I don't know. I just didn't know if you had looked at that table, because I want to make sure that I'm interpreting it correctly without having read,
Yeah, so basically if coyotes are distracted by eating deer, they don't eat turkeys.
Yeah. But it does. So does that mean that if I'm managing a property for turkeys, the more deer I have, the better?
Probably not.
Because the deer end
Well,
up eating the plants that are preferred by turkeys too, right? We
this
don't
is
want that to
what
happen either.
this is where all the argument is really between people, because we could have different interpretations, and we don't actually have evidence to support or refute any of the
No.
interpretations. For example, it may be that when habitat quality is better, you end up having more deer and turkeys, and coyotes eat the deer because they prefer deer over.
Yeah.
Like, that could be related to habitat.
Well, there's so many explanations for this,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just that the coyotes in that area of South Carolina have specialized in deer.
Yeah.
That's a possibility too. I mean, you and I were talking, and y'all have to realize that some of this is just off the cuff, like us
Yeah.
thinking through this, and there's
Right.
tons of ways that you could explain that. And some of the reason we're doing this is just to give you examples.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fun for people to hear us work through. Like, this is the kind of stuff we would be having the same conversation over the phone if you and I were looking at this
Mhm.
paper that just came out,
Yeah.
and then we're coming up with hypotheses, in real time.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of evidence out there of specialization of predators that have similar intelligence levels as coyotes do.
Yeah.
So it stands to reason that might happen too with them. Like
Yeah.
in certain areas, you might have groups of individuals that tend to hunt for one prey item more than another.
Well, you think about how that might happen. Coyotes be bopping around through the woods and finds a hen on a nest, catches it, and it's like, oh, okay, that was a great meal. And then it's doing it again, and it happens a second time. And now it's like, wait a minute. If I bebop around through the woods in these particular areas, I find these hens a lot.
Hmm.
And then the next thing you know, that becomes a behavior associated with that pair of coyotes, and maybe they pass that on to their offspring, and you could certainly have
Absolutely. I
a
mean,
group that
yeah,
specialize on something that maybe the other coyotes never bebop through the woods in the right way.
that's right.
Or they found some turtle eggs, and now they're turtle specialists, like
Oh,
like
yeah. I
stuff
mean,
like
that
that.
happens too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, think about this. I mean, there's areas that have abundant wild pigs, and pig remains show up in coyote scats all the time. But how is a coyote pup that grows in an area? Let's just say, I don't know. I won't throw out any specific. Let's just say an area that doesn't have a lot of wild pigs. Washington State. Like how often is that coyote pup going to get the opportunity to hunt for that prey item, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, a coyote pup growing up in South Alabama is going to be much more familiar with that prey item, where it's likely to encounter them, and when it does encounter them, how it should probably initiate the pursuit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's a really, really interesting question, and we were talking about it earlier. That is something that we're going to work on as part of the Florida turkey work. We've already had coyotes tagged on the same sites as turkeys, and we're planning more work. Hopefully, some funding will come through to help us do that with some of the funding mechanisms. But I find that really interesting,
Yeah,
that there could be some individual coyotes that just are turkey eaters,
yeah,
and it's not necessarily ubiquitous. Although I will say, when you look at these scat studies, assuming they're not sampling one individual over and over again, it's probably relatively common that they eat some turkey.
hmm I think so.
And it's probably relatively uncommon that they're eating primarily turkey, since it's
Yeah,
pretty rare to find a scat or you don't find that many that are dominated by turkey, right?
especially outside of spring.
Yeah. Which, like I said, that's super consistent across these studies, that seems to be when coyotes would get them. And, people out there know, if you're a turkey hunter, you put out a decoy and a coyote comes in and, tries to stalk it. Like, I get sent that a lot. I've seen that happen.
Right.
I have had turkeys gobbling that they just shut up, and I don't know why. And then a few
Right.
minutes later, here's a coyote.
Right.
Like that, I believe that they're well, they're definitely eating some of them, and there may be some individuals that are specializing on them. And it makes a lot of sense if they hear them gobbling and they're hungry and they've had turkey before, they might go see what's going on, see if they can figure out an angle.
Yeah. And I know another thing that people talk a lot about too is they worry that having lots of coyotes suppresses gobbling activity and makes
Yeah,
it harder to hunt or less enjoyable.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Stands to
You know,
reason, doesn't
how
it?
how often is a turkey just gobbling his face off and it doesn't attract the attention of every coyote in the woods
Yeah.
and bobcat and
Right.
everything else that wants to eat a turkey,
Yeah.
including
If it
me.
sees a coyote, they're gonna quit gobbling just like they do when they see us,
Yeah, so it makes sense.
But I think one thing that's really important to touch on here, because believe it or not, Marcus, we've been going an hour and 40 minutes almost at this point.
Oh, we got an hour.
Huh? So we
We're
still
on
got
it.
an hour left? Good. We'll
No,
go
we're on.
240.
We've been on an hour.
Oh, really?
Yeah, hour and 6 minutes.
I've got a counter at the bottom that says 141 for some reason.
Your counter's off.
It always has been. Um, but there's two questions embedded in this, and one, right, the one that we've been focusing on the most is what is the extent or the magnitude of the impact, and then the other, of course, is whether or not we can do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, let me address the extent because
Yeah,
that's where I was going,
right.
and then I think we can go to you for some things about what to do about it because you've worked on that specifically. Yeah, like I said, I've got a whole bunch of things that we'll link, and you can see notes on a whole bunch of specific studies, but the impact on or the relative proportion of coyotes in any given study varies substantially.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, it's a high proportion of the tagged individuals, and others it's relatively low, and you can kind of see that whole gamut as I've laid it out in this post. But since I made that post, there has been another paper come out
Yeah.
that is out of Mississippi. This was Guiming Wong, who is a quantitative ecologist that focuses on population ecology and is really keenly interested in predator-prey population dynamics. So, and he's done a fair amount of turkey work in the state
Mm-hmm.
with Adam Butler and others.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, fun fact, I worked on this with him a little bit
Oh, cool.
early in the study.
Yeah.
When I was at Mississippi State, we talked about it and talked about where to get different kinds of data. And I was already sort of thinking about coyotes and how they were influencing turkeys, and he was also.
Mm-hmm.
But he went on forward with it and published this paper just recent.
Yeah.
And it's Wong et al. 2023, I believe. But we will link it for you. And the study name is Inverse Relationship Between Coyote and Wild Turkey Population Time Series.
Yikes.
And then there's actually another sentence worth of
That sounds
foreboding. Yeah, so inverse relationship basically means they're negatively correlated. So when one goes up, the other one goes down. And that's precisely what they present in here.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you look at figure 1 in this paper.
Yeah.
As turkey relative abundance, which they quantified as the catch per unit effort.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, if folks are looking at this figure,
So like
that's what
turkeys,
CPUE
turkeys
means.
harvested per
Per
number of hunter
har-
days or hours or
Yeah,
whatever.
per hunter effort. That's
Yeah.
right. So how long does it take somebody on average to harvest a turkey? As that went down over time, which has been it was going down from the mid 1980s all the way through the early 2000s, which you remember in Mississippi, the low population in Mississippi was in the early 2000s. I
Yeah.
wish they would have had another decade of data when that catch per unit effort started going back up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think they had the trapper data.
Mm. Yeah.
I think that's why he wasn't able to do that.
They quit collecting the trapper data.
I think so.
Oh,
They had
man.
a state level metric or something, but
Yeah.
the Coyote is catch per unit effort as well, where I don't know exactly. I mean, it probably tells you in the study in detail
I'm
how
sure
he
it's probably
calculated it,
from
but
trapper surveys.
yeah,
Almost
some
every
sort
state
of
has those where you have to report. Yeah.
yeah, they somehow quantified how much trapping effort
Right.
is going on and how many coyotes are being reported.
Yeah.
So these, let me be frank about it. These are not the strongest data sets. There's a lot of variation, a lot of problems with them.
I did confirm that it was from a survey of licensed trappers.
Okay. So there's all kinds of reasons to be, have a healthy skepticism. But they do find a pattern where as coyote populations increase, which you can kind of see that pattern of increase, that I think that's probably reflective of coyotes. In that range map when we were showing it, coyotes were showing up in Mississippi in the 60s, right? So by the 80s, they should really be taking hold.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see, that's sort of where we're starting here in the 80s, and you continue to see that population increase. And over that same time frame, turkey relative abundance was declining. Now, there's alternative explanations for that. This is just a correlation.
Yeah. I mean, for example, this starts in 1983, and the number of 1983, Ford pickups on the road has also declined over the time.
Yeah.
But that's not why turkeys have been declining,
Yeah. That's right. I mean, property size has also been declining.
Yeah.
The
acreage planted in pine plantation.
The number of
has increased.
the number of paved acres in the state has increased substantially.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's all sorts of things that are correlated with this.
The human population
doesn't necessarily mean causation, right? But it was pretty interesting that there seemed to be this pattern, and when they actually did detrend it, which basically, as you might imagine, when you have this time series like this,
yeah,
and there's a general trend over time where like a population is declining over time,
yeah,
well, of course that's going to be negatively correlated with any population of anything else that's inclining over time,
right?
Just because of time,
yeah,
they're both being affected by time.
So typically, what we do in these studies is look for other independent data sources to see if there's the same pattern there.
Yeah, that's one way. He did it mathematically.
Of course, because he's way better at it than I am.
Yeah, I don't even, frankly, to be honest with you, I can't understand some of the stuff that was going on in here, but I sort of vaguely understand. They detrended the year. So in other words, that a lot of the relationship is explained by year, like which year are you in, is explaining a lot of the variation in that data. So he basically took all of that out mathematically so they could see among all the variation not explained by year, how much, how strong is the relationship. And there was still evidence that they are negatively correlated. So that's better.
Yeah.
But we still need to do work on it. So I guess the point to me overall is
it's also a very reasonable, a reasonable correlation to expect, right? So
well, that's what I was about to get at. Like, I don't think it's that unreasonable that coyote populations would affect turkey populations to some degree.
No.
They're not going to eat all of the turkeys, but there's some equilibrium met there, and particularly because all those studies, it seems like the one that is vulnerable is hens nesting, and that is the more concerning part to me. Like they don't have to eat that many turkeys to have a relatively large impact when they're eating hens.
And there's been no diet study that tries to differentiate male from female turkey parts, right?
In the scat?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. I guess the closest thing that we would have to that is looking at cause-specific mortality rates between tagged males and tagged females to see if one or the
We
other is
we
more
probably have
vulnerable.
that data already,
Yeah.
and
We probably
well,
have to amalgamate it from multiple
yeah.
sources, but
Well, the hen mortality rates are more similar to what's reflected in the coyote scat in terms of percentages. Like having 10 or 15% of hens killed by coyotes, not that
yeah,
unusual.
yeah,
Whereas with males, it's usually a single digit, low
yeah,
single digits.
yeah,
So, but we are developing a genetic tool where we'd be able to do this.
yeah,
We're almost there where we can distinguish male and female based on some genetics magic
yeah. That'd
that
be super
one
cool.
of my colleagues is doing. So, yeah, that's a really cool question. But I guess the point is, I think it is reasonable that they are negatively related, and they're definitely eating some turkeys.
Hmm.
And if they're eating hens primarily, it makes sense that coyotes would affect populations.
And we've talked a lot on this show before about we've given many reasons why it would be concerning that coyotes are specializing in hens or that
Yeah,
they're disproportionately affecting hens because we've made the case that individual hens can be very important to the productivity of a population
yeah.
of
One
the
think
area that
about
you're
that
trying to manage.
locally. At the state level, it may not matter,
Yeah,
but on your property, it
yeah,
might.
right.
Like if you've got the coyote pack that specializes on turkeys,
Yeah.
I know what's happening. The people are out there; they're already ordering traps, and so
You think
uh,
so?
I do.
You think
So
they needed
before
you
we
think they
get
needed one more reason to make that leap, or I feel like the
no,
ones that were going to do it already did it.
yeah, and that's fine. I,
Yeah.
I want them to have fun on their property and go enjoy it and try to get stuff done, and that means different things to different people, but we're probably not going to make the problem worse
Yeah.
as long as you're still tending to other desirable activities.
Well, where I've kind of arrived at it, and we can, I mean, if you want to, like, I can go into all the data from when we did intensive coyote removals in Georgia and that
I
experiment
I
and
do
stuff
want
like
to get
that.
into that.
Yeah, I mean, the Cliff Notes version of it is that we had professional trappers. They trapped 2 years back to back. Each year they were starting in late winter, so think like right after deer season, and they were trapping all the way up through the end of April.
What
Okay,
were the size of these properties?
5,000 acres each. No,
Okay,
no, no, 10,000 acres each. My bad. There were
10,000.
10,000 acres each. There were two wildlife management areas, and they were in the same county. And so we had
So a
professional
scale at which
trappers.
most people can't operate at.
Yeah, we had professionals. Sometimes we had more than one professional trapper on a 10,000 acre property. So sometimes we had two or three guys setting traps, and these are guys that do it, that make their living, that put food on the table trapping, not amateurs. And so it was very intensive. It was across a large scale that most landowners can't trap at. And we were effective the first year of trapping on only one of our sites at reducing coyote abundance because we tracked it throughout the study period using genetic techniques. And we reduced it in the first year of trapping by 80%. But in the second year of trapping, use the same trappers, approximately the same number of trap nights, within reason. You're not
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same, but it was the same overall level of effort, and the population of coyotes on that property went back up to where it was statistically no different in terms of abundance than it was before we had ever done any trapping on the site. And then on the other site that was right down the road from it,
After 2 years of that intensive effort,
yeah,
you're not at less yotes.
yeah. So after year one, our data showed an 80% reduction in yotes. And then we trapped again in year two, but after that, it showed that the population had recovered up to the point before we had even trapped the first time.
Ugh.
And then on the other site right down the road, we never influenced coyote abundance whatsoever. It was basically like a straight line throughout the study, even though we were trapping.
So basically, even the time point where you saw a dip may not even be real because
Maybe not.
you
I
got
don't.
one site that there didn't happen at all, and then the
Yeah,
other site it only happened in one of the 2 years.
yeah. But then,
Golly,
like in
10,000 acres with that kind of effort, man. How is that? How is that even a thing? I don't understand it. And
well
that's
the
what
other
people get mad at me about. It's like I'm not telling you that I completely understand what's going on, but that's what the data shows,
yeah
which is consistent.
yeah
That go look at the other study that was done at a similar or maybe even larger magnitude over a longer term for sure.
yeah. So John Kilgo, South Carolina, Savannah Riverside. He had 3 8,000 acre study
Yeah,
areas, spaced out across 300,000 acres. So they're spatially separated from each other, and they did not use like capture mark recapture with genetic techniques like we did to estimate abundance. But they were monitoring fawn survival as a function of removals, and they did 3 years, I believe, of removals, and they kind of found the same thing. If you just watch the fawn survival numbers, it was like they trapped that first year, survival went way up, but then they kept trapping, and it kind of just like oscillated like
yeah.
this. The,
Well,
the, the
it
survival
was
response.
yeah, it was up one year, the same one year, and lower one year in the
That's right.
trap.
So the net effect was like a modest gain.
Yeah,
But they experienced a modest gain after trapping an 8,000 acre area with professional trappers
yeah.
for several months out of the year. I mean, you're talking about, you know, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands
I
of
wonder
dollars that
what
you would
the
have to pay someone to do that.
cost per fawn or cost per turkey would work out to. Like assuming there is a modest gain, the amount of effort, man, it was just remarkable in those studies.
So I worked that out for our study. Well, actually, I take that back. I didn't work it out for the fawn gains, but do remember that it was costing us about $400 per coyote removed.
Wow. So you're paying like probably it would probably end up being in like the thousands and thousands of dollars
Yeah,
per.
but I mean, a landowner wouldn't pay that. I mean,
I know.
we were paying
Well,
pros
that's
to
what my
trap
point
really
is.
large
Like
acreages.
you
Yeah,
would expect with that kind of effort over multiple years that it would just be like a complete hole in the distribution of coyotes.
yeah, it would be like turkey nirvana.
Yeah, and it's like even then you can't consistently show that there's even less coyotes
Yeah,
on that kind of scale. That to me is frustrating. I don't really understand it, and everybody gets mad at me about it.
yeah,
But it is what it is.
yeah.
Like what are we gonna do about it?
If
Like
I
you can
really, really,
argue up and down, but the data like that, it's not like those y'all botched it up.
no,
You caught. I mean, I remember Kilgo's numbers. They literally were removing hundreds of coyotes off of those
yeah,
areas.
yeah. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I was disappointed in our results.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I kind of in my initial reaction to the study from the Jones Center with they've got predator exclosures
well,
on the
that's what I was.
site,
Yeah,
and they actually showed that it financially would make more sense if you were trying to increase fawn survival
yeah,
to have a fence and keep
yeah.
all of the coyotes outside the fence.
I'm so glad you said that because I was about to bring it up, and the way that I was going to phrase it is that if you're really serious about trying to manage coyote predation on your property for deer or turkeys, I think you're better off building it doesn't have to be a high fence. You could just build a 4 foot woven wire fence, like they did down there at the Jones Center, and they put a hot wire at the bottom and a hot wire at the top
Yeah.
on a solar charger,
Well,
and
yeah, and
it's pretty dang effective at keeping them out.
yeah, and if you have it where you can ride the fence, so to speak,
Yeah.
you can see evidence if they've dug a hole under it, or if there's one getting in somewhere,
Hmm.
and just you got to stay after it.
Yeah. But what was really interesting is it wasn't that long ago that you and wasn't it you and I that we rode around those predator exclosures? Didn't we do it one time?
I don't think I've done that, but I don't think I did it with you.
Oh, I remember what it was. We've both done it independently, but then we were talking to Mike Connor about him not that long ago because you and I were thinking about doing some more work out there.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about how the raccoons over time have learned to use branches that overhang the fence, and they've
Yeah.
actually worn the bark off of those branches that are their access point to getting into those exclosures. Do you remember him saying something about that?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do.
And he said, so we're having to do some limb trimming and stuff like that to shut those down.
You just can't win, man.
Well, you know what this boils down to is nature hates a vacuum.
Yeah, that's true. It just fills back in.
When you create one, it doesn't matter if it's with habitat, predators, prey, whatever, it's going to fill in with something.
Yeah. There've been a whole bunch of studies now where coyotes were tagged in these ridiculously long distance movements.
Yeah.
Like we had one at Fort Bragg that we tagged in the middle of Fort Bragg, and it was like 3 months later. It was almost in Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm.
It was not like, if you track it in the few month period, it had to have walked at a minimum 900 and something miles.
Yeah, and what's crazy about that is it had probably already gone several hundred miles before y'all tagged it.
Right. Like when then you start to think about why would trapping even at thousands of acre scales
Yeah.
not work? It's like, well, of course it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That
And
they're covering that in a day.
And consistently we see that, somewhere around a third of the coyotes that are tagged in a study kind of move like that. I mean, they may
Yeah.
not move from North Carolina to Washington, D.C., but they might go from, metro Atlanta, down to Columbus, Georgia,
Yeah.
or somewhere like that.
Well,
I mean, they may,
certainly more than. I mean, it's not even operating at the county scale.
yeah,
So unless you're trapping the county, and
Yeah.
even then, you're probably not enough. Like, I don't want to necessarily discourage everybody from going and doing that, but we need to temper expectations. Like, we can't experimentally demonstrate that you're going to get a big
Mhm.
impact out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the smallest home range that I've ever seen from a coyote that I tagged was a female during the breeding season that was only using about 500 or 600 acres. And then, most individuals, I mean, especially when you talk about outside of the breeding season, you're talking in square miles in terms of the areas that they use, or sometimes, like you said, even counties.
Mm.
Like they go back and forth between, Lee, Russell, and some other county.
Yeah. So that sucks. I mean, there's no other way to put it. But
Yeah, it sucks. It sucks for, if you're in terms of trying to control it.
yeah, but I think we are moving toward getting better evidence to show that improving the quality of habitat to escape predation and potentially provide alternatives to turkeys, you probably have more control over predation at the scale of your property that way. And
That's
if
right.
you do them together, great. And with some of the nest predators, maybe you can have a bigger impact at the smaller scale.
Yeah.
Which we covered the one study in Canada that suggested that raccoons can rebound basically immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to be consistent.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Where I arrive at on all this is not to tell anybody one way or another, what they should or shouldn't do, but rather just this is information. Do with it what you will.
yeah,
What I've decided to do with it, I still trap, because there's all these other enjoyable aspects to it for me, just like there are with hunting. But I don't have great expectations that it's changing, making profound changes in deer or turkey populations or in my
Mhm.
hunting experience on the property. But that doesn't necessarily take away from my enjoyment of doing it.
right. Yeah, and maybe there are some that are specializing and you catch one of them.
Sure.
Maybe locally then you do.
Yeah.
I still think we have a lot of room for work on it, which is why both of us are actively trying to fund work related to predation.
Right.
I definitely think we have more work to be done, but don't think that going and setting a few foothold traps is going to solve it. because I just don't think that's a reasonable expectation.
I don't think so either.
So,
Especially for a species, like with deer, for example, expecting a positive outcome from, I think, predator, like especially like coyote and bobcat removal with deer, is probably way more reasonable than expecting a positive outcome for turkeys, just because of the diversity of the predator community that preys upon turkeys at different life stages, right? There's just, it's like as you,
unless you have a coyote population that's specializing on nesting hens.
yeah, right. It's reasonable to believe that even if you pull coyotes out of that system completely, that you're probably going to have compensation by other predators that are
Yeah.
still there. And so then where a lot of people take that is to the natural conclusion of, well, I need to trap everything. Well, maybe so.
A lot of people are doing that.
Yeah.
And they swear by it.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the habitat part. Predators probably magnify habitat problems,
Yeah.
just like habitat problems could magnify predation.
Right.
So, if you're in relatively poor conditions, coyotes could have a larger impact by killing, hens that don't have anywhere good to nest than if your property was full of good nesting cover.
That's right.
Probably not an issue then. So, there was one other important point that I had, and I've forgotten it now. So, thank you for that.
You're welcome. I don't know if this is a helpful point or not, but it keeps popping up in my mind, so I guess I'll say it. But I've been on several properties that have outstanding habitat and no predator control that have tons of turkeys.
Yep. That's true.
To be totally transparent, there's probably a number of other factors that are different between those properties and average properties. Like the ones I'm thinking of tend to be much larger than the average land holding, for example. So it's not, I recognize it's not apples to apples, but it's possible.
Yeah, it's still an anecdote.
Yeah.
But my experience, most of the time when people are really doing jam up job of habitat, they're also doing some predator stuff.
They are. Yeah. And
they're usually doing them in tandem.
And I have no concerns about that.
I don't either.
The one thing that I do take a little bit of issue with, and maybe this is because I was taught to trap primarily by guys that are more old school or traditional in their techniques, is the only thing I don't like about it is I don't like how some people just want to like broadcast trapping out there on social media, just because that is something that the general public really, really does not understand. And that gives me a little bit of pause. But other than that, like I don't know. That's everybody has a right to do what they want to do, but the way that I feel about it is I like to show, when I show trapping, I like to try to show more of like the outdoor enjoyment that I get with my family in doing it versus, just showing stacks of
dead animals.
Dead
bloody
animals,
animals.
pretty much. Yeah.
I'm with you on that. I don't think that that's a good idea for us to be broadcasting everywhere.
I don't want it
giving
taken,
the impression that you're torturing animals or something.
I don't want it taken away. I want to keep it as a tool.
Yeah.
But then there are, then a lot of people would counter argue and say, to me that, the antis are going to try to take it no matter what. So I'm not going to try to hide it. But
it's not really the percentage on the tip, right? The ones that are going to be against no matter what, or the ones that are for no matter what. It's the ones in the middle that are important. Like that's the majority of people.
Yeah.
And you may start losing some of that support when you're showing a bunch of gruesome stuff. I mean, I don't like looking at it.
Yeah.
I don't like looking at, a picture with 100,000 raccoons dead in it.
Right.
So, I did come up with my point that I wanted to make. I kind of made the point, maybe maybe in your circumstance, you have a coyote that's specializing on turkeys and you remove it. But based on that logic, you could turn that around. like, well, maybe you have a coyote that doesn't like turkeys, and you remove it, and it allows the door to open for another one to come in and start specializing.
Mm-hmm.
So something to think about. We usually don't see
You're just
both
gonna leave
sides of that coin.
You're just gonna leave our listeners with that. And
Yeah.
you know what? There's something else that I was thinking of that you inspired me by sharing that. Then I'll share this as well. Is a lot of times, you and I have said stuff like we've never talked to someone who's trapped and said it didn't work. To be completely fair, I can't think of an instance where someone has told me a story about doing a major habitat improvement and they said it didn't work either. You know? Can you think of that?
No, the only thing that even similar to that would be food plots.
Mm-hmm.
Like they, really hated a blend that they planted, or it just completely
I
failed, or
gotcha.
something like that.
Yeah.
But I can't think of one.
Well, my point there is I think we all look for positive outcomes to the time that we spend on, you
Yeah.
know, aspects of managing aspects of our property. We
We
want to see
want to
that
cash
payoff.
in on our sweat equity.
Yeah, we want to think that what we're doing is actually matters, of course, because we spent time on it, right? You know?
Yeah.
So, all right.
Good.
Well,
Good deal.
I think that's a lot of good information for people to think about. And if you're frustrated because we didn't leave you with a specific direction to take that information, we did that on purpose.
Yeah. Well, some people are going to take it and be like, well, this is evidence of why we need to be trapping. And others will be like, well, this is evidence of why we don't need to worry about trapping. And, all I can say is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what I can say is that's a pretty well-rounded literature review. So if you want to go look at the papers, that's a large portion of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's probably other stuff. It's not completely comprehensive, but I was trying to find as much good information on it, and here you go. So you can go and look at that and share it and do whatever you want with it.
Boom.
And leave us a rating, because we really appreciate it. We want the show to have a bigger reach and be successful, and we want an opportunity to give you something.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to talk about football season? We can start talking each week about what happened. Do you want to talk
In the
about that?
football season?
Maybe I want to talk more about football this week than you do.
You probably do this year.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. We beat Alabama and A&M.
Yeah, but it was a win, buddy. An impressive win at that.
Hey, last year after dropping one to New Mexico State, that in fact I had my whole family at.
That makes it so horrible.
I mean, I'm not taking anything for granted at all with Auburn football.
Yeah, I did see some projections that Florida was not favored to win 5 games.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was not favored to win the national championship.
No,
I was like, that's probably that's probably a safe bet.
They're not favored to have a 5-game season.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's not good. Maybe it'll be better than that.
SEC football is better when Florida's in it, man.
Yeah, I like it when we have several really good teams.
Yeah.
Where any given week anything could happen. I think that's part of the culture of football in the Southeast. It's one of the reasons is you got such a competitive conference. It's not any fun when there's only 1 or 2 teams that are worth anything.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to go out on a limb, by the way, and say that my alma mater will probably be pretty good again this year.
Yeah, I'd say that's safe.
Yeah, they got
None
after.
of mine will be.
They got after Clemson on Saturday. That was, yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
Well,
all right, we're wasting everybody's time now.
Well, they can shut it off.
Is that the strategy? Stop listening?
Well,
No.
we made it clear that we didn't interject that in the middle of the episode, so they had to get through it to listen to more turkey.
It's only the dedicated few now.
Yeah,
and we
that's right.
appreciate you.
Yeah,
we do.
Do we have a giveaway today?
We do.
Okay, what do we got?
We have another
Florida camo hat.
Florida camo hat. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I was trying to think through. I think I have more items than that, but this one will be the Florida Camo hat.
I'm picturing that they sent you a box and you just like look at the top item and you're like, okay,
No.
we'll just giving them away like in the order that they were in there.
No. They actually did send me a box of hats
Gotcha.
to give away, and then he did not do that with shirts because they're, size specific. So
Yeah, so he's sending them direct. Yep.
yeah, but this week will be a hat. All right, we ready for that, listener?
Yes, sir.
So we've got a Florida brand camo hat for Bearded Turkey Man.
Nice.
Wait,
is that you?
Well, it could be.
He's giving a hat to himself, everybody.
Yeah. So, Bearded Turkey Man, we appreciate you listening and everything, and we appreciate your 5-star rating. And I wanted to read that to everybody. All my podcasts are whitetail-based podcasts besides this one. Oh, everything else is about whitetails. I'm very interested in doing some turkey management on my farm, and I have learned a lot here. Thanks for what you guys are doing. Keep up the good work.
Cool.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yep. Just reach out to us. We'll be happy to get you this hat in the mail. It's a really cool looking hat.
Yeah, and as another note, make sure that you tune into our habitat management centric episodes, because we oftentimes talk about how turkey management principles can accomplish deer objectives too.
Yeah. And we even had an episode on Deer University, I think.
Yeah, that was like that was a while back.
Yeah,
but
that was probably 2 years ago. Even.
Right. But we've done it.
Yeah. So
go check that out.
all right. Thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate it.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.